It was kind of normal being in that kind of family at the time. You know, being in Brazil was pretty young, you know. It just, everybody did jiu-jitsu in my family. My mother did jiu-jitsu. I mean, it was just like all my uncles, everybody just did jiu-jitsu. I would go to the competitions and watch jiu-jitsu. It's like, so it was just something we all did. It was just the most normalest thing. It'd be kind of weird sometimes you see like some in the newspaper, and it's like your uncle or somebody in the newspaper, or you know, people talking about the Gracie family, because it was a very prominent family in Brazil. But it's like anything else. It was just a normal thing, you know. So pretty used to it. Actually, the first one that started Academy here was a Horion. For me, what happened was this: when I was around 7 years old, my mother was dating an American who she met in Washington. They dated, and she eventually got married. And she goes, "Hey, you know, we're moving to the United States." So we moved out here, you know, and I was up here in Northern California, which I did like. You know, it was kind of an adjustment. Obviously, you show up and you don't really speak the language. You know, I'd taken some English in Brazil, but for the most part, I didn't speak English. I didn't really realize certain things until I got older. Like, so I stayed here, obviously, and then when I turned 18, I moved back to Brazil. Is what happened, and I was training there. And at 18, you have a different mindset. You know, you're not looking at life like you do when you're 7. You kind of start to realize, wow, this is really cool. You know, how I was so impressed, because I think the biggest thing that I remember in my mind was that living in America for those years, I was like, I'd watch the Raiders or something, football, and I'd watch other types of things. It always was like the strongest guy always will win, you know, the most powerful, the bigger. And then I remember when I was in Brazil and I'm watching my uncles and my cousins, and you had these huge guys, you know, they'd go at it, you know, and it was like my family, my uncles, my cousins, or whoever was doing the jiu-jitsu, the more technical guy would win. And that really changed my whole mindset. Number one, I wasn't a very like a giant person or anything like that. Average build, average size, and it totally like gave me a whole new understanding. Like, wait, if you just study this, you can actually compete and defend yourself against this. That was the biggest thing for me. I was like, this is really cool. I got to do this. I got to do this for real. And it set me on a path in Brazil where I would train day and night. You know, just like wake up in the morning, literally wake up before breakfast, before anything, and walk to the academy, go home, eat, you know, live my day, do whatever. At nighttime there was training, hours and hours, all through the group classes. I do every group class that there was there, because I realized that my time in the US had put me behind. I remember when I was small and I would grapple, you know, I did pretty good, and all of a sudden it's like my cousins that never went to America, they were much better than me at that point. So I said, I got to catch up to these guys. And I just started training, and I started training. And you know, it put me on a path. Eventually, you know, you asked about moving out here. So there was an interest with some of my family members about coming to the US. And that's a whole story within itself. It involves a lot of people, like Chuck Norris, and everyone wanted us out here. So I came out and I brought I brought some cousins with me and everything. And eventually I realized I really missed Northern California. I like the mountains and the atmosphere over here better. So I ended up coming out here and doing jiu-jitsu. I would say late 80s was small. The 90s when it started getting big, even before the UFC, but it was the early 90s. You could make money teaching and so forth, but you know, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was like you teach a private class, make $20 or something. It was, you know, and Hoist would teach those all day. There really wasn't that much money in the sport, you know. It wasn't big, no one really knew about it, you know. It was really interesting, because imagine the first school before the first UFC, because I opened up, I think at least a year before the first UFC out here. before any competitions. There were 0 competitions in the United States. And I'm opening a school. People don't even know what it is. They're like, what is this? Are you grappling? That's kind of goofy. Why are you wearing that? Pajamas? What is that? You know, they didn't, a lot of, there was people that you had to tune them up a little bit and kind of show them, hey, this works, you know. So it was kind of like the Wild West for a little bit, you know, but there was something good about it for sure. So Nick and Nate, the Diaz brothers, what happened with them is I had a student, his name was Steve Heath, and really good guy. He used to fight MMA, the whole deal. He started training with us and representing us when he fought. So one day he lives in Stockton, and he got introduced to to Nick actually, and he called me up one day and he said, "Hey, I got this kid here, 16 years old. I'd love to have you meet him. I mean, he just learns stuff so quick, and he has so much ability, and so forth." And I had a student that went out there with me. His name was David Terrell, who also fought in the UFC and everything. One of the best grapplers in the United States for sure. And me and him went out to Stockton to check out Nick. We just kind of, I did notice, man, this guy picks up really quick. He moves like some kind of, I don't know, he just would get good at stuff really quick. I was impressed with him, and he was a quiet, good kid, you know. So he had a younger brother, 14. I don't think he was as interested in training. He was just like, what the heck is this? He just wanted to, you know, go to the taco trucks with us afterwards or something. And that was Nate, and he took after Nick, and, you know, but that's how I got introduced to both those guys. And they used to come to my school here in Pleasant Hill. Now, you mentioned Gilbert, and who brought him in was Jake Shields. Now, Jake Shields was a fighter who was a tough kid for sure, but he was lacking a lot of technique. So Jake stopped by my school one day, and he said, "Yeah, I want to train a little bit with you guys and check it out." He came in, and Dave Terrell was here, and his first day on the mat, him and Terrell go, and Dave puts him in I think it was called the Peruvian necktie, and puts him to sleep. And so Jake wakes up like, what the heck was that? You know, so, and instead of him being intimidated or upset, he goes, "I got to learn this stuff. I got to train with you guys." You know, he was so impressed. And then he just went in 100%, and he got really good at jiu-jitsu. And he brought in Gilbert, who had met from wrestling. And Gilbert was like, you know, "Yeah, I'm doing wrestling, but man, I want to fight," you know. So Jake kind of guided him and got him into fighting and joining our team. And then so the funny thing was, I had Nick and Steve Heath and all these guys over in the academy out there in Stockton. And then I had the San Francisco guys, and for a long time they didn't even meet each other. They just heard about each other because the other ones were the other way. And they finally met each other and started talking, and they became like best buddies and best training partners, which was cool. I wish I could say it was a genius move on my part, and I had a master plan, but I really didn't. The whole thing was, I was just so impressed that these guys wanted it so bad. And I also thought, man, these guys can really do something cool. The UFC was already going. The Gracie team, if you will, was no longer really involved in the UFC. So Hoist was no longer fighting in it. And pretty much the only guys from anything Gracie was the Carlson Gracie guys would occasionally do a fight or something. But so the UFC was like getting a following, and there was never Gracie anymore. You know, after Hoist left, it was just like, well, there's no more Gracie involved in this, you know. So I said, well, let me start my own fight team. You know, I think I can make these guys pretty good, you know. And that's what happened. I was like, okay, these guys don't have any money. You know, I mean, we mentioned like Nick and Nate. I mean, Nate, he literally would train because he wanted to eat tacos or burritos or whatever afterwards. He didn't have any money. He was hungry, you know, literally. He comes from, these guys were broke, and Gilbert and these guys, they really didn't have money to pay, but I was just impressed with those guys, and I said, I'm gonna bring these guys on board. And yeah, that's how I sponsored them. They were all white belts, but it's what's in the heart, you know. Skill can be attained, toughness can be attained, perseverance is the hardest thing to get, you know, because everyone wants to be rich or be famous or, you know, but it's the perseverance that it's like, hey, are you really to do this day in, day out? And sometimes with the poor people, it's easier for them because they don't have a plan B. You know, you're not getting world champion MMA fighters or boxing guys out of Beverly Hills or Bel Air or something. They're not coming out of there because they have other things they could do. These guys, if they're going to make their dream, they got to live this life, and it's a hard life. Then they got to persevere through it. And I did have people along the way that dropped out, that got into stuff, and they never made it to where they should have made it. You know, they had all the skill. They had more skill than the guys I just talked about, maybe, you know. But they didn't have that perseverance, and the guys that persevered made it. This far away from nothing happening with all those guys, that far so many times. With the 4 guys you mentioned, they really never lost that focus. They had a dream. This was all of those guys' dream, to make it big. And so they stuck with it, you know, and I made sure they stuck with it too. You know, it's like, hey, you guys are gonna train. I always come to train tomorrow, train the next day. I'm gonna take you to judo today. I'm gonna take you to wrestling. I'm gonna take you to this. We're gonna go to the boxing place. That's how Andre Ward and those guys got involved with my guys. I mean, I was like, I lived and breathed training. That's what I lived for. You know, I wasn't interested in money or anything like that. I mean, I had to keep the lights on, but I didn't have a lot of money. I was just like, hey, you guys gonna train. Because I had my dream to make a good team, and they had their dream, and everyone kind of just moved forward with it, you know. But because they pushed it through, and I helped push it and everything, and then, you know, I can look now and I can look at, those are the guys that you know, maybe the public knows about, but for each one of those guys that's doing good, there's probably 100 guys representing each one of those guys that you've never heard of because they didn't fight or they weren't, but there was still some kid that needed help, and the jiu-jitsu and the helping made them successful, and they're doing great. And that's kind of what made it all worth it for me. I think Nick taught me a lot for sure. With he never played the game that they wanted him to play. He just, you know, it makes you think outside the box a little bit. It makes you think, well, why are these people controlling you? You know, you mentioned even the UFC. It was like, why this pay is ridiculous. How come they get more money than the fighters? As a promoter, that doesn't make sense. You know, it was like there was so much stuff. And Nick, I mean, he was a knucklehead with a lot of stuff for sure, but he was definitely groundbreaking in his mentality. I don't know how severe it was. I still don't probably know what's in his heart or anything. But definitely with him, I remember, you know, the stuff like I remember he got stabbed. He had a knife wound to the stomach. There was all kinds of stuff. A lot of his friends didn't make it. You know, they got shot at parties and stuff. They got curb stomped. There was all these things that Stockton was crazy, you know. And for Nick, like I said, it was his way out. And when he got suspended, it kind of took him off the path he was supposed to be on. And you know, he was being punished for, not only did he do what he did, but he was vocal about it. And it was like that nail that kept going up, and they wanted to hammer that nail down because he represented a movement. So they said, if we don't beat this guy down or we don't smash him, we're gonna have these other guys, oh, I'm smoking weed or something. And they couldn't have that. They didn't want that. So they wanted to destroy him. And a 5-year suspension and everything else, and it got Nick into going to clubs and stuff. I mean, he didn't have any focus after that, so it was very bad for him. Imagine a kid, maybe from a single mom. They're looking for strength, they're looking for guidance, they're looking for leadership. They're gonna find it somewhere. A lot of the times they're gonna find it in the wrong places, and they're joining a gang, they're doing drugs, they're just doing things they shouldn't be doing, and now their whole life is on a bad course, and it's gonna end in a bad spot. Or they can walk into a jiu-jitsu academy, and that little act is going to change their whole life for the positive. It's going to put them on another course in their lives where they're going to be it's gonna bring positive things. It's gonna bring, hey, I want to stay healthy. I can't be out drinking and getting drunk. I can't train the next day. I can't be doing these drugs. That's not the people I hang out with. These guys they're competitors. They like to train. They enjoy, So for the youth, it's amazing. What I love too about jiu-jitsu, this is what I noticed when I was in Brazil. I got to Brazil, and I was older, and I'm training. I'm 18, 19 years old when I was there, and I'm like, this is so cool. This is like, man, I'm working out with these people. You cannot do this in the United States. It's like, what the hell is the guard? I mean, think about the first time a person went, especially back, there's almost like a homophobic type of it, we're grappling. I don't want to, it's like, whoa, I just want, But their mentality was like, they were kind of a colder people. When you go to Latin America, it's a warmer people. They invite you to their homes. They say, hey, let's do this. There's friendships you make. And living in the United States, I noticed it was a different realm. It was like that warmth wasn't there. And I think jiu-jitsu was one of the ways to bring in that warmth. And that, to me, was as important as anything else. It's just amazing how many, if you stick to something, it's amazing how many tentacles are going to come from that. And I look back and look at my grandfather, Carlos, who really started the whole Gracie Jiu-Jitsu movement. And it's like today, all the tentacles spread throughout the world. And I've changed so many lives. With this one guy was passionate, and he taught his brothers, like Elio and so forth, who did his thing, and it just kept going. And it was like, this guy Carlos was just his dream. That was his dream. And his dream has changed the whole planet, which is incredible. I think it helped me, me living in the US, and it was like, I was in a single mom situation since I was very young, and my mom was out here and everything, and she remarried and everything, and it was just kind of like, and I didn't have the direction and everything. So once I got that direction and everything, I said, this is the coolest thing. I got to spread this, for sure.